All right, Mr. Dave.
Okay, you see my screen okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So here's my, in getting started with the topics for tonight, I kind of liked Zach's approach where he just had some code pen demonstrations. And then actually I started to get thinking about it and was looking at trying to get everything set up and realized I might as well just do my topics for these two under my examples on my GitHub pages site. And so I wanted to kind of show those tonight and go through some of the code and try to help answer some questions. And I'm really hoping to kind of get some feedback from both of you as I'm kind of diving into this, not really knowing the details of things like the JavaScript events. And that's the one that probably has the most options, right? Like looking at HTML5 tags, it's pretty straightforward, and I give some examples on that. But events, I mean, cover basically everything you can do, a user can do on a website. You can capture that and set a trigger or run a function based on that event, right? So just to kind of show you some of my examples here for JavaScript events, and he mentions about including mobile devices and animation and transition events here. So if I click on this, I list here some of the JavaScript events that are available are things like mouse events, and that's left click, right click, mouse wheels, scroll. You can even see I just had a pop-up here that shows an event that my page is loaded. And that's an onLoad event that you can put in your body tag. And when that gets, when the whole site completely loads, I set an alert to show me that the page is loaded, right? But you could, rather than have an alert, you could have it, run a function and do other stuff. You could have them manipulate the DOM and do all sorts of things. So, everything you do with the mouse, same with the keyboard, you can detect up and down and left and right arrows, space bar, all that stuff. You can just basically kind of determine that. And then frame and object events, which I have an example for, I'll show you. Form events, drag events, clipboard events, print events, media events, like things like video and some of the HTML5 tags I'll talk about. And then mobile touch events, which are things like, just like you can use your mouse and keyboard on a website, you can detect when somebody's on a mobile version of your site or something. You can detect when they swipe, when they touch with their finger, and things like that. So it's a little hard to show this, the mobile touch events and stuff, but if you bring up your developer, you can mimic those types of interactions. So just to kind of show you, most of my examples are pretty basic. Basically, I've got a button and an event that's tied to that button, depending on what I'm doing, and then it calls an alert or a function. So you typically would call an event in two ways, right? You can have an inline through something like this, where you have a button that has an on-click event with an alert. This is just an inline, call to a JavaScript alert that says, hey, you click this. Or you could call a function. And then the other option is through an add event listener that you would have in JavaScript. And that's where you don't even have to have the event linked in your HTML code like you typically would do, like we've been doing with our examples. We'd have an HTML element and then an on-click event inside that element that says, when I click this, trigger to run something. With the add event listeners, you run this outside of, you don't run this inside a function. This is really running in the JavaScript code. When the page loads, it'll start looking and listening for events that you determine, right? So I can say, listen for a click on an element with the ID of my button, and then run a function, right? That just says, hey, update some inner HTML to say hello world, that kind of thing. And so here's some of my examples. I've got basic on-click event that I click and it detects that. Same with a right click. If I right click, it says, hey, you right clicked, and then it'll bring up the context menu. On mouse over, as soon as I move my mouse over that button, it pops up and says, it detected that. And then the same with a mouse out, it doesn't do anything until I actually move my mouse off of that element. So moving on to kind of some of the other things it asks for, right? So it talks about transition events, right? So you can, you know, in studying for this topic last night, basically was like, well, what's the difference between a transition and an animation, right? A transition is a single change, right? You can, in this example, I've got a div that expands once, and then as soon as it expands, it detects that the transition has ended, and I can change the element after that transition. But that's it, right? It doesn't do anything else. An animation can have multiple keyframes that let you do multiple steps, right? So transitions, one event or one step. Animation could be 20 steps or 3 steps or whatever. So that's the differences. So with a transition, you can basically just detect the end of the transition. That's it, right? I don't think there's a transition begin. I think there's just basically wait for the transition to end, and then you can detect that. The CSS animation, if I click that, it's going to say it detected an animation start, and then it's going to start going around, and it already ended. So I'll do that again. So you can detect the animation start, and there's also an animation transition. So if it's actually in the middle of doing an animation, you can detect that, and then at the end. So if I refresh here and hit start and hit OK real quick, you can see that this animation is going in a square there. And as soon as it finishes, it says, hey, the animation ended, and I can update that. So that's how you can work with and interact with CSS transitions or animations with JavaScript events. For mobile events, like I was saying, I have this little element here that says mobile touch start, right? And if I click that with a mouse, it doesn't detect anything. But if I bring up my developer tools, right, and I'm sort of simulating a mobile window here, if I click on that, it now detects, hey, that was a mobile, somebody touched that with their finger on their phone kind of thing. And that's basically a lot of the same options you have. The topic actually used the word onTouchBegin, which I could not find that actual element, the event element anywhere, but onTouchStart and a lot of the same options, right? Swipe if you lift off and that kind of thing. You can detect what people are doing on their mobile phone on a page. And then the last one I wanted to show is this onLoad, and I kind of do a couple different examples here. Like I said, I've got in the body of the web page, I've got an onLoad event that basically alerts me once the page is fully loaded. And then I've got the same thing for this iframe, right? I'm loading a separate page called newpage.html, and to sort of simulate a page loading a long time, I found out there's a website you can go to that you can basically, it's called delay.me, and you can say, hey, I want to load an image, but I want it to take 10 seconds before the page loads or that image loads. So I can, if I refresh here again, I scroll down, you can see that there's this new page. And if you're looking, you can see there's a little thing that says waiting for delay.me. And once that loads, I get a loaded and it shows the image. And then you can see the iframe also has an event that detects that the iframe is loaded. So you can use this, and I would suspect that something like this could be used for if you're loading a large video file or audio file, right? You want maybe to start playing, and there's some ways to integrate this with HTML5 video and audio tags where you can preload stuff and then play it after it's available. But that's kind of my example from the front end. Just to bring up kind of what the code looks like. Let me open this up. So, like I said, I've got under on that same page as an example, I've got the onLoad for the body, basically as soon as the whole page loads, and that also includes that iframe and that image that takes 10 seconds to load there. And then in my example, as you can see, like I said, I've just got some basic buttons with some different types of alerts for buttons or any kind of elements that interact with your mouse. The on touch start And then I've got a demo for this my frame, and I tried to do a scroll. Like I wanted to see if I could detect where I wanted to have the page be larger than the iframe so that I could have some scroll bars. And if I scrolled around, it would alert me. I really couldn't get that to work for some reason, so I may not be using that right. But yeah, so I've got that in the HTML side, and then on the JavaScript side, like you said, I've got some event listeners for things that like look for div1, which is my first CSS transition, div1 there. And I, wait for a transition end. And then I run div transition as my function once that's ended. And I can change the color here, or I can change some text that says, hey, the transition is complete, right? So that's just kind of a basic way to show what happens. Obviously, in the real world, you would use that to trigger something more functional. As part of learning this topic, I also obviously got to learn a little bit more about how to trigger and make transitions and animations for CSS work, which I was not familiar with at all yet and hadn't gotten to those topics. But basically you can go in there and set some CSS that says, here's the, yeah, and I can show that as well, even though I feel like I need to get a better grasp on this. But my div, right, starts off as a green box, and then I can establish an animation that says, move this box around in a square that labels the keyframes and moves the square by a certain amount of pixels and all that stuff. And I name it, animated div. And then in JavaScript, I can call those, right? I can all of a sudden add styles that are calling that div and saying, hey, transition over 4 seconds and only loop that one time, or you can make it iterate multiple times. So I can click on the element to start the div animate, which adds some elements to, or styles to CSS to make that actually move. And then after that, I can detect when it starts and when it ends and do some stuff, right? So I say at the start, change the color to orange, and then change the text or give me an alert that it started. And then at the end, it turns to red and stops. So that's really JavaScript events in kind of an overall broad nutshell, right? And I link to the best source. I kind of bounce between Mozilla and W3 Schools, but I actually really liked W3's sort of straightforward examples, right? Because they explain each option for each type of event that you can use. Like I said, there's things for frames where you can just basically detect anything that sort of happens on the page. I mean, really, you can detect almost anything that either happens on the page when it loads or that a user does on a page and then do something based on that event. So they really give you a ton of options here. There's things like on your forms, you can use like on blur, on change as a way to do validation, where you could basically detect that when somebody clicks away from a field, check to see if that field meets the criteria or is empty or whatever, and then you can pop up alerts or change some div to let the user know something that they need to do something different, right? So drag events, clipboard events, right? Copy and so on. So that's kind of my presentation on that topic. Any questions on that I can try to help answer? Any input from you guys on events that maybe I didn't cover?
No, so that was pretty good. You know what, that was cool. That I'm glad you taught that, because I didn't even know that the developer tools on the like Chrome. I just tried it right now, to be honest, while you were teaching.
Yeah,
that's cool. You can actually do the touch, basically the touch emulation.
right.
I didn't know about the touch, but so I mean, I've used the developer tools before, but that is a really cool feature that I hadn't found.
Well, that's the thing is I probably just only sort of learned that because I was trying to figure out how to make one of these. I mean, how to make the mobile stuff work, and then figuring out that, hey, with the tools off, I'm trying to figure out what I did with my page there, but Yeah, with the tool off, obviously this event didn't work. And then, and I think that's kind of why it shows this sort of, like, rather than a mouse cursor, it sort of shows this ambiguous circle, right? So, if you're adjusting your screen to be sort of, the size of a phone, you can simulate what it would be like to actually, like, swipe or something. And yeah, that I didn't know that either till I was trying to figure out how to make that event work, and then realized that if I clicked here, it would detect it. But without the developer tools, it doesn't detect that click. So
yeah, very good. No, and then I think you did a good job on to these.
For sure. Well, and you found a lot more events too than I did when I was trying to learn this topic. So like the blur, I had no idea. That's really cool.
Yeah, and I didn't really cover that necessarily in my demonstrations, but when you look through the W3 examples, yeah, I mean, that's probably got to be a big thing.
Yeah, just knowing that it exists, I guess, I think is, I mean, there's so many things that you can do that I know that we're not even aware of yet.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, good. Well, if there's not any other input on that, I'll go over to my other topic here. This one's way more straightforward, right? So here's the examples I give for HTML5 tags. And what's nice is, basically if you have video and audio files, whatever those might be that you got hosted somewhere versus, you have a YouTube video, they give you the embed code to list and have on your site. But HTML5 has options for video and audio that gives you a built-in player with a lot of options in terms of how you display it, if you want to give people the option to, control the video and that kind of thing. So I just show how that works here, right? So I've got under video tags, right? You've got some of these different attributes that you can apply to a video file. So you've got your source, obviously, whether you want to show controls or not. If you want the video to autoplay, what the width and height of the video player should be. If you want it to loop over and over again. If there's sound and you don't want sound to play, you can mute it. And if, for example, maybe you don't autoplay it, but you want to show a thumbnail, you can use an alternate thumbnail image with this poster attribute. And then finally, there's a preload option. I talked a little bit about how you can maybe use a JavaScript event to detect when the page is loaded, and maybe that would be kind of integrated somehow with the preload for a video tag that says wait until the video loads, right, and then do something. So here's basically what the tag is I did to play this little video here. Is I just used the source for the video, the width, and then I wanted to show the controls, autoplay. I want it to loop, and I want it to be muted. There actually isn't any sound, but I just thought I'd test that out. So that's a simple tag basically to show a video on your page, which is much simpler than I think it was right before HTML5. To get a little bit more advanced with a video tag, you have the option to first of all just show. So maybe so one thing I would say about HTML5 tags with video, audio, and canvas is that they're very much cutting edge in terms of the fact that if you're trying to build a site that it's compatible with older versions of Internet Explorer and Safari, it seems like you might want to be careful with what you do here. So they give you some options. For example, like maybe you have two different versions of the file. One's an MP4, which is what my file is, or if that is not compatible or the codec doesn't work right with some players, you can give an alternate version of a different type of video file. And you can basically give it an option that says the browser can determine, hey, if I don't support MP4, I might support WebM. They can then load the appropriate video. So if you're trying to go for cross compatibility, you want to use some more options here and render your video or in a couple different formats to give those options of and then finally it'll come back and say, hey, if it doesn't support it, it'll just play or display this last option here. It says your browser doesn't support the video tag. So and I thought this was kind of a cool video. I don't know if you guys have ever been out to Arizona during some of our thunderstorms where we get these things called microbursts that are just like a downpour of rain and wind. And a guy captured this last year out in Tucson. You can see there's just this like spout that just sort of shoots down out of the cloud there and hits the ground and spreads out. And we've had some of those. I'm in Phoenix, but we've had some of those over the years. And it's like you're just in the middle of a tornado almost, just how windy and rainy it gets. So it's kind of cool. And then
that's crazy.
Under the audio tag, it's much simpler. Basically, you've got some of the same features as a video tag with things like you can have controls like I have listed here, whether you want to autoplay, your loop attributes where if you want to loop it over and over again, that kind of thing. So I just listed a little MP3 file here that plays a 20-second clip, right? So if I hit play, it would play that, and then I could stop it or whatever. So this, I think, basically works with, I'm assuming that if you can link to an MP4 or an MP3 file that's hosted on the internet, you can embed it inside a tag and list it on your own site. I think ideally you would use these where you're hosting the video or you're hosting the audio local on your website, and you're just linking to it in a way however you want to. So the last example is the canvas tag. And the canvas tag is interesting, right? Because I was reading about this last night, and it's sort of an open, like empty space area of space, as I put it, on your page that you can do anything. But by itself, it's useless. It's just a blank area, and doesn't have a, you can't interact with it. You can't do anything until you write some code in JavaScript to do different things. So things that you can display in a canvas area, or that basically you can render through JavaScript, or you can load images, you can draw lines, shapes, filled shapes, gradients, you can spell text out, and then it sort of renders it into an image on the screen. But everything has to be done through JavaScript, right? So it's like a canvas element with an ID, and then in JavaScript you sort of reference that ID and then apply stuff to it. So but you can interact with it with your mouse if you write the code, and I have a kind of a cool example I found here. So this is just a basic code of a canvas element with some script that basically lets you draw a circle on that canvas. And if I right click, you can actually see it just says save image as, so it actually renders it as an image, but it's being generated by JavaScript and applying to this canvas tag. The one example I've seen that is super helpful is I've occasionally watch a guy on YouTube called The Coding Train, and he presents stuff in a very cool, easy to follow way. And he teaches mostly P5.js, which is a JavaScript framework that is meant for displaying things and displaying art and all sorts of stuff. So he gives a bunch of cool examples of how to use a canvas and how to use JavaScript to interact with that canvas in interesting ways. And he does things like he has two canvases on a screen that are connected through WebSockets, so that two people across the world could load the same web page. I could draw on the left canvas, and then the other user would see what I'm drawing on the right canvas, and then vice versa. You could interactively draw with some basic JavaScript and some canvas elements. So I created a little looking through examples. I came across an example to kind of show you that, here's a canvas space, and you can see that as I move my mouse around, I had to load this on a second page because it's really particular about where your mouse is on the window, and having on the previous page, having the canvas all the way at the bottom of my example page, I couldn't get the coordinates quite to work right. But you can see I've got coordinates that basically start at 0, 0 at the top left, and then go all the way down, right? So this is a 500 by 500 pixel canvas, but I can basically detect mouse clicks, and if I click somewhere, it can draw a square where I click my mouse, right? So to kind of show you the code for that, I gave code present, demonstration, or kind of showed my code in my present example page here for these two. But let's see, HTML5 tags. So this is the HTML page for the canvas. It's just a basic 500 by 500 element with a status div here, right? And then under the JavaScript, this is the code to basically detect the mouse and put a small X or a small square anywhere I click there, right? So I can, basically detect the element by ID. That has a thing that they call get context, where they determine whether you're going to draw 2D or 3D elements, because you can actually draw like a 3D square, for example, or a 3D circle and render light on it and rotate it and do all sorts of stuff. You can get really crazy with this. And I can do an event listener here, like I talked about in my JavaScript events, for a mouse move. And every time I move the mouse, it basically updates this function and outputs my mouse coordinates, mouse X and mouse Y, which it just creates a variable where you detect the event, or the client X. This event is where the mouse sits, and you have to offset that to get the correct coordinates. And then it detects a click down here, and if I click, it basically says, okay, draw a red rectangle, basically 20 by 20 pixels, and offset that by 10 so that it draws it right in the center. And yeah, so that's kind of, I found this really interesting. It's really kind of over my head in terms of all the things you can do with it. The Coding Train YouTube channel really gives you some in-depth options of some cool stuff you can do with canvases and things. But that's my presentation on HTML5 tags. Any questions or input on that?
Yeah, no, that was pretty cool. I liked it.
Okay.
You said the guy on YouTube was the Coding Train?
Coding Train.
I need to write that down.
Yeah, he focuses specifically on this JavaScript framework, but I think it really can apply to just understanding a lot of basic concepts. And I came across him because in one of my previous classes, we had to do, I think it was a C++ class. We had to program and design like a basic asteroids game where you're flying a little vehicle around in space and shooting bullets at rocks. And when you hit the bullet or hit the rock, it kind of explodes into smaller pieces. And he gives a really cool, timing couldn't have been perfect. He gave like a really cool example of building an asteroids game in JavaScript using this P5 framework. And like the way he presents stuff is super simple. He doesn't, talk above anybody. He ends up doing these like live broadcasts where he just programs for like 4 hours. And then he'll cut those up into small clips and post them like the next 2 weeks after that, some sort of thing. So if you get a chance, look through his stuff and find stuff that sort of applies to you, because he covers a ton of topics, but it's really helpful. So
sweet.
And then I do give my sources here. Actually, I was surprised looking through information on HTML5 tags. I felt like this HTML dog site actually gave a ton of good information about some things to be careful about, and some of the options when it comes to using HTML5 tags. So
nice.
And that's it for my presentations.
All right, sweet. Okay, mine's just gonna be like super quick. So let me share my screen. All right, can you guys see my screen? Or I think you gotta click on my. I think you gotta click on my name.
Not yet.
Yeah, not yet.
All right, let's see. Oh, here, share.
There we go.
There we go.
Yeah.
And then just move that behind or something. There we go.
All right, cool. So, all right, so mine's my lesson, which is pretty quick. I liked it. It was actually cool. So it's manipulating CSS class using JavaScript. So the things I did was, what I did is basic HTML style. So you can actually change the actual CSS stuff within JavaScript. So here I'll show you what it does. You click on it, the font and the color change just through. And what I did, I used an array like an array of colors, an array of fonts, and then the background color. So even the font colors got changed. So these are the colors for the font. So colors is font color, and fonts obviously the style font. and then the background color is this one. So what I did in the function, every time as I go through it, I went through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 values, and it just kind of changes it as I click on it. Right. So that's one method you could do with CSS is to with JavaScript is to change the CSS style, and then you could also do like a hide and a show. So the tag's still there. It's just either visible or not visible, or hidden, which is right there. Super simple. So the tag name was text, which is right here. It was fairly simple. Any questions there? Not. So the next one was I changed this div text with the mouse over. So as I hover over it, it'll just change. Really basic. I liked it. I was like, yeah, that's pretty neat. So so the mouse over event, you call it out. So the div has a mouse over event that when it does get called, it gets called, and over here, so it takes an argument, which is this, which refers to itself, which refers to the tag itself. So in the function, the object is the tag itself, which is the div. Because you can see on this case, what I try to do differently, I was trying to see if there's a way to do it without actually giving it a name. You know how you usually give it like a class or an ID. You're able to do it if you just call this and then make sure you handle it. And it's shorter, which was kind of cool. You don't have to type like get value by whatever, kind of like this, get element value. It's shorter, so I go, that's pretty cool. So anyway, so yeah, I just made it change, and when it gets off, basically when you leave it, it goes back to the old value by calling the out function. The mouse is off. That one was simple. Cool. And then the last little tidbit I did was I just made a quick function where I put my name lowercase and just lose focus of it. I could hit enter, or I could hit tab, or I could click off, and all it did was do the to uppercase method, and it converts it to uppercase. Super simple. And the way it did that, I went back to text, so that the input type is text, and the ID is first name, and then called an uppercase function. So I created a function, passed in a variable called input. It got the value of input, or I got the contents of the tag f name, which is whatever the user or me typed in there. And then I made the value, which is the name, which is in there, and I just changed it to uppercase, and that's when the function executes it. And that's pretty much it. I think I covered what we needed to on that one. Any questions?
Yeah. So with the last one there, the uppercase thing, does that update like as you're typing? Does it capitalize it, or every time you make a change, or does that wait until you get done typing and then it uppercases it? Does that?
Yeah. So right now it's the on change. There's other options. Let's see if I can. On blur, on cancel, on play. So that's the one I had, on change, on close, on context menu. So I could right click and it'll do it. So these are all the triggers. Whichever trigger you select.
Right.
I guess on.
I was just curious, what does the on change one do? Does it wait for you to, as you?
So let me save this. I'm gonna rerun this. Here it is. All right, so yeah, so as I'm typing, it immediately executes on input. So I'm putting lowercase j and uppercase j, so it's doing it on input. So you said on change. You can try on change. You can try.
Yeah, I was curious with it. Yeah, I'm just curious just to see, since we just talked about events, what the differences are there.
So okay, I just refreshed. So Julian.
And then you click away. Okay.
Yeah, so that's the difference. So on input, it's immediate, which is, I'm glad you asked that question. I wasn't sure. I didn't try that, but now we know.
And it's kind of basically doing the same thing. Every element, you're doing a JavaScript event to detect something, and then you're manipulating the styles for that element versus the element itself, basically, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So, well, yeah, exactly. You're right. So the text box itself stays, it's just it's a container, and you put input in it. Now, what's inside, which is the value of the container, has the value of the container it gets manipulated, but it's within, if I'm not mistaken, it's within the DOM of that container.
Okay.
So like if we go to, let's see here, I think if I do, what is it, F12, and memory, no, maybe not. Anyway, there's a way to look at what values have stored. Cache application, maybe not. Anyways, but yeah, that's my presentation. It was pretty simple. I figured I was gonna take like 2 seconds.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Sweet, thanks guys. So at this point, I'll just stop recording. And if you guys have a minute,